Increasingly, we live in a world where nothing makes any sense. Events come and go like waves of a fever, leaving us confused and uncertain. Those in power tell stories to help us make sense of the complexity of reality. But those stories are increasingly unconvincing and hollow.
Excuse me, I'm lost.
This is a film about why those stories have stopped making sense, and how that led us in the West to become a dangerous and destructive force in the world. It is told through the prism of a country at the center of the world, Afghanistan.
The Asiatic kingdom of Afghanistan is located roughly 10,000 miles from either coastline of the United States, almost directly on the opposite side of the globe, westward from China, beyond the Himalayas. It is a landlocked country, bordered on the north by the Soviet Union, and on the east by Pakistan, and on the west by Iran.
The Khyber Pass, on the northwest frontiers of the Indian subcontinent, linking Pakistan with remote Afghanistan. To drive north through the sullen mountains is to journey backwards in time, to an isolated nation which has consistently ignored the approach of a 20th century world. But this year, events have caught up with and overtaken feudal Afghanistan, traditionally a buffer state standing alone between major powers. It has suddenly caught world attention. New men have seized control, men who appear willing to reactivate ancient grievances and to assist the ambitions of powerful friends. In this edition, Echo looks at a tiny nation engulfed in big issues, Afghanistan.
In 1946, American engineers, along with their wives and families, began to arrive at a dusty airstrip in Helmand, in southern Afghanistan. They worked for the biggest construction company in the world, called Morris & Knudsen. And the King of Afghanistan had brought them there to build a giant planned new world. A complex of dams, canals, roads, and even a new model city. The king's aim was to harness the power of the giant Helmand River and turn his country into a modern society, just like in the West. The king was called Zahir Shah, and he often came to visit the project. Afghanistan was a deeply conservative country, and he was determined to modernize it. What the king was trying to create in Helmand was a copy of what President Roosevelt had done in America in the 1930s. And the company he had hired, Morris & Knudsen, had worked back then for Roosevelt, building a new world of dams and power stations across America. Now they were going to do the same for Afghanistan. By the mid-1950s, the American engineers had built the giant dams that were going to create what they called a new wonderland of vegetation and power in Helmand. But the project was running into problems, and it was beginning to lose its innocence. As the giant dams were completed, they had an unexpected effect. They raised the level of the water table and started to bring salt to the surface. And one of the plants that thrived in this new soil were poppies. Some of those leading the project said they should stop. But the American government stepped in and insisted that they should continue, because by now the dams had become a central part of the struggle with the Soviet Union. All sides in the Cold War began to compete to offer Afghanistan bigger and better schemes to modernize the country. Afghan politicians exploited this ruthlessly. The Prime Minister, Mohammed Daoud, spent his time travelling the world, playing the countries, Russia, America and China, off against each other. Daoud wanted to use the modernisation as a way of consolidating his power. Afghanistan was a fragmented country. Power was divided between ethnic groups and tribes. Daoud was a Pashtun, and he saw how the dam project in Helmand could be used to consolidate the Pashtun grip on the whole country. He persuaded the Americans to make the project even bigger, to turn it into a giant piece of social engineering. Thousands of Pashtun nomads who spent their time roaming the border area with Pakistan would be settled in the new farmland created by the dams. Daoud presented it as just another innocent piece of modernisation, and the Americans happily agreed. What they didn't realise was that they were unwittingly being sucked into Afghan power politics. Not only was Daoud increasing Pashtun power, but he was sowing the seeds of bitter rivalries over the division and ownership of land in Helmand.
For centuries, the Pathan tribes of Afghanistan have lived by their own rules. Here, a man carries a gun as a badge of honor, and most use them with deadly accuracy. Here, even today, tribal chiefs rule with absolute authority and tolerate no interference, even from the state. Armed with independence of spirit, they've never compromised with foreigners. Islam, in one of its more straight-laced forms, is the national religion. The power of religious authority remains a conservative force, regardless of who rules in Kabul, the capital. And now there has been a revolution. King Zahir Shah was ousted, and his cousin, Mohammed Daoud, decreed Afghanistan a republic. The king went into exile. The new regime has the backing of Afghanistan's small but powerful army, and that in turn is supplied and equipped by the Soviet Union. The troops are Afghans, but the heavy weapons, tanks, advisors, ammunition and fuel come from the Red Army. It was President Daoud, Prime Minister until 1963, who first encouraged Russian assistance, and Moscow did not hesitate to take advantage of the invitation. They poured in aid, both military and civil. They built this enormous power plant on the Kabul River. They even mollified the Muslim community by building the odd mosque. Curious indeed, for they suppressed their own Muslims in the Soviet Union. But the Soviet presence in Afghanistan has little to do with altruism, and everything to do with an old Russian ambition, to gain access to the Indian Ocean by an overland route. Afghanistan is a stepping stone. Between it and the sea is the Pakistani province of Baluchistan, but the Russians are at work on that problem. While wooing the Afghan regime with showy new projects, such as this housing scheme, the Soviet Union is actively backing Afghanistan's long-time claim to Baluchistan, whose people, like those of Afghanistan itself, are Pathans. If Kabul's old longing for this valuable strip of territory could be fulfilled, the bricks and mortar of Soviet diplomacy would have built them a road to the sea. One thing that stands in the way is the presence of their bitterest enemy, the Chinese. They fully understand Soviet ambitions in this area and have busied themselves with a number of practical civil aid programs while keeping a close eye on developments, especially those concerning Afghanistan and the Chinese ally, Pakistan. While they remain, the Russian dream of rolling down to the Indian Ocean is unlikely to come true, for the Chinese themselves would be interested in opening up the same access to the sea, and more important, to the oil of the Persian Gulf, of which the Chinese domestic economy is in increasing need. Until Mohammed Daoud's coup, the Afghans had played a waiting game, accepting aid from all quarters. They thanked the Chinese for building their roads, but opened the aid gates to the west as well as the east.
In case number 2, was wollen wir jetzt hier beginnen? commentateurs ont inclus, eux,
Afghanistan has always been suspicious of foreigners, but King Zahir Shah knew his country desperately needed what these foreigners could bring. Now Mohammed Daoud has, for all intents and purposes, allied himself with the Soviet Union. The ordinary Afghan, caught in the endless circle of subsistence living, now has his future in pawn to the Russians as well. And the future does not look that good. While the Russians were building pretentious airports and roads, thousands of Afghans have died. A 3-year drought has destroyed bullocks and crops. Water and grain supplies dwindled. There is little enough economic basis on which to build a new people's democracy. If Soviet strategy in this part of the world is consistent, it seems at least possible they were behind the fall of King Zahir. In his place, they have, in President Daoud, a man whose policies they may be able to shape. Already he has made appropriate noises in the direction of Pakistan and is encouraging separatist movements among Pathan peoples in that country. Afghanistan is still the buffer between big nations involved in the Indian subcontinent, as it was a century ago. But the nations are more powerful today, and the issues more dangerous.
И первым объектом, который, собственно говоря, это был Кабульский хлебокомбинат. Когда специалисты туда пришли, там была, значит, вот земельные угодья или земля, подвести туда воду для орошения, и только тогда что-то там начинать делать. В итоге на этой площади было построено 2 государственные фермы. Это колоссальное хозяйство, потому что под каждый объект мы Афганистану предоставляли государственный кредит. Кредит на весьма льготных условиях, там под 2% годовых всего.
With projects like this, Afghanistan became the 4th largest recipient of Soviet aid anywhere in the world. But at the same time, in the south of the country, the United States was also constructing dams and housing. 2 superpowers jockeying for influence in a far smaller country. As communism and capitalism clashed, foreign aid flowing into Afghanistan paid for places like this, Kabul University. Here, many of the bright young minds of Afghanistan, hungry for new ideas, were excited by the opportunity to bring rapid change to their country. Some focused on communism, others immersed themselves in political Islam, an ideology rejecting both the Soviet Union and the United States. The university became a hotbed of Afghan radicalism. In the 1970s, the peaceful gardens and foreign-funded buildings here at Kabul University had been taken over by radicals, Maoist and Leninist students marching in the streets, and over there, Egyptian Muslims training on Kalashnikovs, Islamists and communists, in a race to see who could kick over the traces of the old Afghanistan and create their new paradise. And it was the communists who got there first.